Hey guys, I'm Jonah from 61B Gang, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about classes and objects. All right, should be fun. So, I'll kind of motivate this by first kind of talking about the point of having classes and objects in the first place. Class is essentially a blueprint for creating objects, and it's kind of a way of organizing functionality and data. So you might organize things as a car, which can move forward, or you can open the door, and its data might be its mileage, or its price, or its color. And you can pretty much model many things in the world like that. You can model a building, you could model, an ecosystem, an animal, pretty much anything you can think of. I'll just motivate this with a simple example of the car. Um, and so the class is the blueprint of how to create an object, and then objects are specific instances of a class. So let's take a look. In Java, we'll do the syntax class, then the name of the class, we'll call it car, and then each class is going to have a special function in it called the constructor. It This is telling Java how do you construct an object. So what do when we create a new car, what is it going to have? Um, so the constructor just looks like this: the name of the class followed by parentheses, curly braces, and we're going to actually want stuff in here as well. Let's give the car one piece of data. Let's give it a mileage. So this is what's called an instance variable. I'll define that in just a sec. But for now, just think about every time we create a new car, we want to give it a mileage. So we're going to pass in a number, miles driven, and in the constructor say this dot mileage equals miles driven. You might be wondering what the this dot means. This dot is just a way of referring an object can refer to itself. So this dot means kind of think of it as like pointing to yourself. When an object is created, it will set its own mileage variable to miles driven. The key point of instance variables is that each separate object can have their own um, variables, and they're separate from each other, even if they're two objects of the same class. To motivate this, let me construct two objects. One I'll call minivan, and this is going to have, let's say, 20,000 miles or 200,000 miles. And let's do coupe. This is maybe has less miles. It has 101 miles. Now I'm going to make another method in the car class, which is just meant to display the number of miles. I'll call it show details. Show details. All show details does is it displays the number of miles in a car. Cool. All right. And let's actually try this. Coop dot show details. The dot. So this is another thing called dot notation. Basically, every time you call a method on a function, you call the dot to basically say, okay, we're going to take the coop object and call the show details method that's housed inside of it. So when we run this, what do we expect to see? 101. Yeah, so there's this hello world that's built into the IDE, but this 101 is showing the mileage variable of our coop class, of our coop object. If we do it with minivan, actually we'll get something different, right? We'll get 200,000, because even though both coupe and minivan have a mileage variable, they're actually separate. It's kind of, you can kind of think of them as they're independent of each other. Um, Likewise, I can change them. I can change one and have it not affect the other. So so if I add a method called set mileage, which takes in miles driven, and again just kind of resets it, this dot mileage equals miles driven. And let's say I do mini coupe dot set mileage 808,000. It's a lot of miles. Probably no car should have that many miles. And then let's do minivan dot show details again and coupe dot show details. So what do we expect? Well, we sorry. So when we create these cars, we give them 200,000 and 101 miles respectively. Um, so when we show the details of the minivan, this first time we get 200,000, then we set mileage to coupe, but that doesn't affect minivan at all. And it's still 200,000 and coupe is 800,000. Okay, but there's another, to add a little more complexity, there's another thing called static variables. And these are variables that are actually held across the entire class. You can kind of think of them, maybe um, maybe it's a certain animal and each animal can have its own name. Like maybe there's a cat we called Sylvester and one we called Fido and one we called something else. But the name of the species is constant. You can't have two cats that are separate species. And maybe this car, maybe in our world, all cars are black. So um, we'll create a string. We'll create a string called color that represents the color of a car, and in the constructor we'll just say color equals black. I don't know. And then add and show details. We'll all in addition to printing mileage, and I'll add some text just to make it clear what we're printing specifically. In addition to printing mileage, let's also print color. Brilliant. Okay. Um, and this is kind of excessive. I'll just get this down to one show details. Okay, so what do you expect? Probably the same thing, 200,000. And then we're also adding this black variable or this color variable that's, oh, I printed mileage. Oopsie. Yeah, we're gonna want this to be color. So we get the minivan's mileage, which is 200,000, and the minivan's color, which is black. Great. But since this is a static variable, unlike the mileage, the variable is actually shared across all the variable is actually shared across all objects. So maybe we have another function called set color. And when I set the minivan's color, it will actually also set the coupe's color, kind of interestingly. Um, and I'll just say color equals color we pass in. Great. Um, and by the way, if you were wondering what this void means, void is just a keyword that means a function that doesn't return anything. It's used to, for example, set variables, but not necessarily return a value. Okay, so let's try this again. Minivan.show details. Now let's do minivan.set_color, and let's change it from black to brown, for example. And then minivan.show details. So it's reasonable to expect that since we did use minivan to set the color to brown, that, its color is going to change to brown, and it sure does. But what if we do coupe.show details? Now, coupe has this in its constructor, so its color is going to start as black, but even when the minivan changes its color to brown, it's changing the static variable, which is set across the entire, which sets the variable across all objects of the same type. So its color has changed from black to brown. To make this a little more clear, let me do coupe before and after. But as you'll expect, the color will start as black and change to brown. And another kind of subtlety here, this will be the last sort of little thing I talk about, is that this method is also static. So what that means is that the method, it will call the same exact method um, no matter what object you call it from. In fact, you don't actually have to use a specific object at all. I can actually just say car dot set color red, for example, and then we'll show the coupe again. Um, it's so well, normally we think of doing something like coupe dot show details and object dot method, but with static methods, it can actually be called at the class level, something like car dot set color. Okay, so just to summarize, we covered the motivations for classes and objects, why we might want to organize data in this way. We talked about the idea of having instance variables, so specific variables that that objects hold that are independent of the variables in other objects. We talked about static variables. Those are variables that are controlled, are shared across different objects of the same type, and static functions or static methods, which are methods that are called at the class level as opposed to our normal methods, which are usually called on the object level. Hope this was helpful. Take care. You guys are awesome. This is a great class, so have fun.